The problem of evil is the problem in explaining how it is that God and evil can both exist at the same time, or how it is that a good God would allow so much pain and suffering as we experience in this world. In the work of many philosophers, the problem of evil is an argument against the existence of God. It has a structure much like this, generally. If God exists, then there is no evil. There is evil, therefore God exists. Or, if God exists, then there is not very much evil. There is very much evil, therefore God does not exist. Or if God exists, then there is not a certain type of evil, a certain type of pointless or horrendous or gratuitous evil. Such evil does exist, therefore God exists. Does not exist. Now, the problem of evil does come in different varieties. For example, there's the problem of what we might call moral evil. Why would God allow beings he created to commit acts of rape, murder, genocide, and so on? And then there's the problem of natural evil. Why would God allow for malaria and dengue fever and tsunamis and Ebola and floods and forest fires to cause so much suffering? In the work of many philosophers, explanations for evil have been given. And in their work, the problem of evil is less an argument against the existence of God and more like a puzzle to be solved, or it's a defense against these arguments. One of the most important explanations that has been given for why God and evil might both exist at the same time is free will. In fact, this is the most important explanation. The idea here is that evil is the result of free will, the free choices of created beings, humans, and in some explanations, angels also. God created us with free will and we misused it. God had good reasons for giving us free will and was perfectly justified in giving us free will, but we misused our free will and that was the origin of evil. God had nothing to do with it. It was our fault. Or it was the fault of other created beings. Some philosophers have explained that virtue is its own reward, and that vice is its own punishment. So, for example, Boethius in the Consolation of Philosophy, Book 4, explains that in answer to the question, why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? Those two questions. In answer to these two questions, we simply need to understand that virtue carries with it its own reward, and vice carries with it its own punishment. Vice corrupts the soul, making the human being sick, spiritually sick, making the human being even less human. And this is a very fitting punishment or vice. And virtue does the exact opposite. It ennobles the soul. It makes us more spiritually healthy. It makes us even more human. And it is good, and it carries with it its own reward, no matter how much we may think, looking at things with our confused gaze, looking at things on the surface, that the good suffer and the bad do not. It's really the opposite. Some philosophers, Boethius again, and various others, St. Augustine, have suggested that evil contributes to a good whole. Evil is found in the parts of reality, in the parts of the universe, in the parts of human history, but the whole is good. An analogy is sometimes made here to art, where where ugliness is in the parts, but the whole is beautiful, and the ugliness somehow contributes to the whole. Think of a moment of unpleasant dissonance, which is part of a symphony, or a harsh, grating sound that is part of a beautiful rock song by the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. In Augustine's illustration, think of a mosaic, where one square is a hideous shade of a nasty, sort of a green color, and the whole picture is beautiful. You may investigate this for yourself. Pull up online a picture of the Mona Lisa, widely considered to be a beautiful painting. Zoom in on the upper right corner of the picture, and you will find an ugly mess of browns and greens that is not beautiful at all, but somehow it contributes to the beautiful whole. The theory here is that God uses evil the way an artist uses these ugly things and contributes to a beautiful whole out of them. God is writing human history or is creating the universe, the way an artist creates a beautiful painting that has some ugly parts, or a beautiful song that has some ugly parts. Another important answer some philosophers have given is that evil and suffering and the pain that this life involves are beneficial to us because they help us grow spiritually. This is called the soul-making theodicy. The theory is that our souls are built and edified through suffering. We grow through suffering. And finally, I should mention that, strictly speaking, according to a number of our philosophers, evil does not exist. If the question is, how do God and evil both exist at the same time? The answer is evil does not exist. It is not a thing in itself. What evil is a lack of a thing. Evil is a lack of goodness. It is a corruption of what exists, not a thing that exists in itself. It is a privation of good or a deprivation of good. Evil is to goodness what dark is to light, or what cold is to warmth. It is not a thing, but a lack of a thing. Now, I've mentioned several names. Here are a few more. Epicurus, in the ancient world, gave us the problem of evil in what is known as the Epicurean trilemma, where he says, is God good? Then God would stop evil if he could. Is God all-powerful? Then God knows about evil. Is God all-knowing? Sorry, I botched those. Is God all-knowing? Then God knows about evil. Is God all-powerful? Then God can stop evil. But then why do we have evil if God is all-good, all-powerful, and all-knowing? Augustine gave the free will defense, and he gave the analysis of evil as something which does not exist. And he said quite a bit else besides. He gave many answers to the problem of evil. Boethius gave several. And then, more recently, let's jump ahead a bit. C.S. Lewis describes pain specifically, somewhat like the soul-making theodicy. He describes pain as God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It is something that gives us a clue that something is not right with our souls, and it helps us turn towards God for the healing of what is wrong with us. Let's go back to the objectors. Mackie, J.I. Mackie, is a philosopher in the 1900s. He writes a famous article in which he argues that the reality of evil makes the existence of God impossible. William Rowe writes an article in which he argues that the reality of evil makes the existence of God improbable. Alvin Plantinga responds to Mackie giving the free will defense. And he develops the free will defense and updates it using the tools of contemporary philosophical analysis of logic and of possible worlds, something called modal logic, which I will not even attempt to describe in this video. Richard Swinburne. Incidentally, Plantinga is still with us, and so is Swinburne, at least at this time. Richard Swinburne gives an analysis of evil which allows us to extend the free will defense beyond what we might call moral evil into what we might call natural evil. It appears that floods and diseases and tsunamis are not the result of the misuse of free will. So if the free will defense explains moral evil, if it explains genocide and murder and rape, how do you explain floods and tsunamis and dengue fever and Ebola? Well, Swinburne has a way of doing that. Or at least he thinks he does. He makes a good effort in a very interesting case at explaining how when God gives free will to us, this free will brings with it the possibility of natural evil along with it. Very interesting analysis. And John Hick, another recent philosopher, has developed the soul-making theodicy. Now, it should be obvious by now that the problem of evil is a big topic with many subtopics. There are many different varieties of arguments. There are many different varieties of explanation. Boethius, rewind to the medieval era. Boethius compares the problem of evil to the Hydra from Greek legend. The Hydra was this monster that had multiple heads, and if you cut off one of its head, two more would spring up in its place. Boethius says the problem of evil is like that. If you answer one of its questions, two more questions spring up in its place. And I think Boethius is correct here. And philosophers have been analyzing the problem of evil ever since, and I expect them to keep doing it as long as philosophers are there analyzing anything. Now, I do not want to give the wrong impression here. I do not think that it is impossible to make some progress just because I don't expect us to ever finish. Maybe an analogy to another discipline would be helpful here. Consider a branch of the sciences, let's say geology. I'm going to toss out some numbers and statistics here, and I'm just making them up to illustrate. Just pretend they're reliable for a moment. Let's stipulate for the sake of this comparison, that 100 years ago, the science of geology knew about 50% of what there is to know in geology. And let's stipulate that in the last 100 years, they have closed that gap, and now they know about 80%. I should say they narrowed the gap. They didn't close it all the way. And let's stipulate that in the next 50 years, they will narrow the gap some more, and then they will know 93% of what there is to know about geology. And let's stipulate that after another 20 years, they will have narrowed the gap some more, and they will still know 95%. But do you really think that the science of geology will ever be exactly 100% complete? Quite possibly not. Maybe some sciences will complete their work. But it seems at least plausible that there will be a continuing progress in certain fields of knowledge that will never quite reach full and complete knowledge and understanding of the relevant subject matter. And perhaps the problem of evil is like this. Perhaps if free will was the correct response, that in itself was 50%. But all of these other responses give us more, and even if you could put them all together, we would not quite have reached 100%, and we still have some good work to do. And they are still doing this good work. They're writing books every year. The problem of evil is not going away, and neither is its analysis.